Okay, so today we're going to learn how to improvise in a fairly straightforward way on a 1-5-6-4 chord progression in the key of B major, which is what I'm doing right now. Now, you might be saying to yourself, hold on Bill, this is absolutely insane. Why on earth would I want to improvise in the key of B major? It's madly complicated. It's got 5 black notes in it. When I see anything written down in B major, it looks really insanely difficult to read. Yeah, it can be. And also, if I had to play in B major, then I would just use the transpose function on my piano. Yeah, so it's absolutely completely pointless. But hold on right there, because it's not pointless. Learning how to improvise and doing it sometimes in these difficult keys can actually be really, really good for you as a musician, and there are 2 reasons for that. First of all, it's a way of stretching you, doing something different and unusual, and something that puts you in the way of what we call just manageable difficulties, yeah? That's how you improve fast on any instrument. I've been talking about this a lot recently. You might know I've got a new book out called How to Be a Better Musician, and that book, we'll talk about it more in a few minutes, but it really swings on this idea of getting better quickly by really challenging yourself, okay? So first of all, improvising in these difficult keys stretches you. Secondly, it helps you come up with new and different sounds that you might not have come across before when you're improvising. And that's just because your hand will fall differently on the piano keyboard when you're playing lots of black notes instead of lots of white notes, okay? So this is something that is really, really worth doing, yeah? The first thing we're going to do before we look at how to improvise is just explore the chords themselves. Let's get going. So let's start off by looking at these chords in fairly basic positions. Now, if you're not sure what a 1-5-6-4 progression is, it's literally the most common chord progression in all of popular music. It's used in thousands of songs. Some songs just use a 1-5-6-4 just repeated over and over on a loop, okay? You'll have heard it, I guarantee, thousands of times. Now, those numbers, 1-5-6-4, just refer to the chords that are built off the 1st, 5th, 6th and 4th notes of the scale of any key, okay? So here's our scale of B major with those 5 scary black notes in. The number 1 chord is B, the so-called tonic chord. The 5 chord is F sharp, yeah, the dominant chord. The 6th chord is G sharp minor. We're sometimes going to be extending that and playing G sharp minor 7. And the 4 chord is E major. So 1, 5, 6, 4. But of course, being good musicians, we're not going to play them in those shapes all the time, in those so-called root position shapes. Instead, we're going to play around with the order of the notes, so we've got smoother voicings and inversions to play around with. Yeah, don't worry too much if you're not familiar with that technical terminology. Let's look at the voicings and inversions that we're going to be using. When I was improvising just then, I was mostly using B in that position, the 1 chord. So there's the basic chord of B, B, D sharp, F sharp. Okay, then I was playing the F sharp chord, the dominant chord, the 5 chord in that position, and I've got it in its first inversion there. So instead of playing F sharp in the bass, I've got A sharp in the bass, then G sharp minor 7, which is the chord I was using most often there, okay, with the G sharp in the bass, and then E. A little bit of decoration in there, and then frequently, because I was just looping the progression round and round, I was just using another 5 chord, another F sharp as a passing chord to get me back to the 1 chord, the tonic. So 1, 5, 6, 4, and then a quick 5 and back to 1. Now, a couple of questions you might have here. First of all, why am I using note names like D sharp and G sharp when normally you would call those E flat and A flat? Well, probably most of the time you would, but it's just as legitimate to use their sharp names. And when we're in a key that is what we would call a sharp key, which labels its black notes as sharps, that is the best terminology to use. Second question you might have is, why am I using that F sharp chord in its first inversion? Why have I got an A sharp in the bass there? That is simply to create a more natural and more flowing bass line in the left hand. So I can go look at the left from B down to A sharp, down to G sharp, down to E. Little passing note dropped in there. Yeah, it just gives me a more natural flowing bass line. So that means when that first 5 chord, that first F sharp chord is written, I've written it as a slash chord. So I'm indicating there the bass note. And that is our basic chord progression. And everything I was doing just a minute ago was really just playing around with that. Let me do it with just a little bit of added complexity, just a couple of times through, and then we'll talk more about what's going on. So if you're just starting out with this kind of piano playing, you know, call it what you want, pop piano, ballad piano, whatever, one of the most important things to get your head around is the kind of rhythms that we use, because rhythm is one of the defining features of the style. Pop piano uses this kind of rocking kind of rhythm that's actually quite difficult to describe, but which you probably recognise when you hear it. And it uses a lot of kind of interaction between the two hands. Yeah, so if I slow down the kind of thing I was doing there. Okay, that's a really common thing to do, especially at with kind of up-tempo pieces, but it happens with slower things as well. So one of the easiest ways to get into that is to play the bass in a very simple way, and actually to start off by rocking your right hand chords by using broken chords in the right. You'll recognise this sound, it's super common, just doing this. Can you see I'm just playing the basic chord shapes there, and splitting those right hand shapes in two, and rocking them against each other, yeah? And if you're really new, I would start literally just doing that and get comfortable doing it. Do it over and over again. Feel the notes under your fingers. Yeah, and go over and over. Now, a really important point about the physical side of doing this. If you're relatively new to playing the piano, you might be quite used to kind of playing the notes on the edge of the keys, okay? But here we're playing lots of black notes, so something you can do to make life much easier for yourself is push your hands further up into the piano keyboard. So instead of playing here, you're playing up here. And it's perfectly fine to play a note. As you can see, I've got that B there. I'm playing right at the top of the note. That's absolutely fine, yeah? So just start off with this very basic rocking pattern. Maybe put the passing chord in there. Then as you get more confident, you can start to vary the rhythm in the right hand a little bit. Maybe do a little bit of rocky in the right there. Hopefully you will find that comes fairly naturally. It's almost kind of like playing the bongos. Yeah. Pop piano really makes a big deal of using the piano as a percussion instrument. Yeah. So one way you can practice that kind of rhythm is just by drumming on a pair of bongos if you have them, but just on your knees if you don't. And practice the kind of cross rhythms between the two hands. They're really hard to describe, but actually they're quite instinctive, especially if you've listened to a lot of this kind of music over the years. As you begin to get more confident, start that kind of rocking motion going between the two hands. You can just try copying what I'm doing there if you like, you know. Using a little bit of pedal to stick things together, pedaling between the chords. If I didn't, it would sound really sparse. Which might be a sound you want. Yeah, but mostly I'm using the pedal there. Something else you can do, which isn't massively more complicated, is just take that broken chord idea a little bit further, okay? Now, there are a couple of ways of doing that. You can do it mostly in the right hand, like this. See what I'm doing there? All I'm doing is taking the constituent notes of the chord and playing them more or less in order from bottom to top. Yeah, really simple way to create quite a good effect. Again, it'll take a little bit of practice, and if you're new to this kind of thing, it might be worth just using that as kind of the next step along the road. Once you're comfortable playing the basic chord shapes, maybe in that rocking way, you know, try splitting up and using the broken chords. It's a tiny bit more difficult. You'll notice that I suddenly lost the power of speech there. That's a really good way of a really good way of seeing if you're challenging yourself. If something's getting a bit more tricky, you'll find it difficult to talk over the top of it. So I can talk while I'm doing this, absolutely no problem at all, and I probably won't make any mistakes. But as I start to improvise in a more complicated way, then it starts to get more difficult to say things. And you kind of have to choose one or the other. You either start messing up the improvisation or you stop being able to speak. Just a little test that you can do there. So play around with those broken chords in the right hand, but once you're reasonably happy with those, you might also like to try some broken chords, what we might call arpeggios, in the left hand, because they can give you a really cool flowing sound. So something a bit like this. Notice a little bit of rocking of the hands against each other there. Now, when you're playing the arpeggios, you have to think about your fingering, you have to think about the pedal, yeah, because it needs to be legato, it needs to be smooth, yeah. This kind of thing doesn't work, you know, broken up without the pedal, unless you're after a really kind of, a very distinctive kind of sound. Notice, by the way, how often I'm running the whole chord, okay, as an arpeggio. So a couple of times on that E chord in particular. Yeah, the right hand is taking over from the left. Yeah, playing arpeggios like that helps you to think about the whole chord across the whole keyboard, which is really important, because often when we play the piano we think about the right hand, we think about the bass line, and we think the two are separate. This kind of piano playing really helps your hands to unify, yeah? If hand independence is something you struggle with, getting your hands to work properly together, then playing a little bit of this kind of piano can really help. Okay, before we go on, this is what I do for a living, so I want to take literally 30 seconds to tell you about some of my product. First of all, check out my new book, How to Be a Better Musician, over at bettermusicianbook.com. It's full of great tips and exercises that will really speed up your progress. Also, take a look at my piano packs and my 3 ebook bundle deal, which includes 7 studies in pop piano. That's a book you're going to find super useful if you can read just a little bit of sheet music and you want to learn this kind of pop piano style. You'll find links to all of those products in the description text down below, in the YouTube cards top right, and on the end screen of this video. So let's dig a little bit deeper into some of the stuff that I was doing when I was improvising, because playing around with this kind of thing and making these kind of sounds actually isn't too difficult, yeah? All you have to do is set your fingers exploring a little bit. You don't need to know loads of music theory. So something you'll have noticed that I was doing sometimes, and in fact this kind of constituted the bulk of the kind of note-based improvisation that I was doing, was just sometimes using notes that weren't in the chords to resolve to chord notes, yeah? So a little bit like this. I play the B chord, and then on the F sharp chord, I would do that. You see what happened there? I started off playing the G sharp rather than the A sharp, which appears in the chord, and just resolved it up. Really common, super common, to the point of being a cliche technique, but it sounds really effective, okay? You could actually use that note, which we would consider a suspended ninth, okay, to use a technical term, just to enrich the chord there. Okay, gives it a lovely warm sound, so don't even resolve it up, play it with the third there, okay, and you'll get a nice, a nice characteristic sound. Then when I got to the G sharp minor chord, like I said, I was often playing that as a G sharp minor 7, and I think a couple of times I did, you'll have seen me do things like this. Yeah, again, just go for the A sharp, it's not a B flat because we're in the key of B major, so we're calling it A sharp, and resolve down to the tonic note, the root note of the chord, okay, the G sharp. And then on the E chord, often, again, I was doing that resolving ninth. Yeah, and up to the passing chord. So often what you can do is create lots of interesting sounds just by kind of moving your fingers around and exploring a bit. See what I did there? So just the B chord, all I did was try lifting the top note a half step, a semitone. Oh, that sounds kind of cool, it's in the scale of B major. And then take it down to the F sharp chord with the A sharp in the bass. Same sort of thing, slightly different inversion on the E chord there. I did that suspension again on the G sharp minor. And then for the E chord, instead of playing that resolution down there. I did it up here instead, slightly different chord shape. Yeah? And then I'm back up to the B. So much of what you can do is just by moving your fingers around a little bit like that. It helps to know what the scale notes of the key are. Yeah, because, you know, your ear will tell you, but it's good to know them in advance. Something else you really need to think about, and I go on and on and on about this, I've said this in hundreds of videos, and sometimes I think people never listen to me, is the dynamics and the expression, okay? The louds and the softs and the kind of emotional content that you put into the music. This is super important. People are often like, yeah, hey Bill, just tell me which notes to press. But the way you press the notes is as important as getting the right notes. In fact, it's more important, yeah? So remember that soft and loud and alternating them can have big effects. So really play around with that. That can be quite hard to start with, okay? When you're just getting your fingers around the notes, it's like, oh, am I playing the right thing? Am I playing the right thing? And that's why you really need to practice over and over to get confident with them, because once you can, that's when you can really start to use the expression. Just before we wrap up, I'm going to show you one more little trick. We're going to vary the progression itself by using what we call a chromatic mediant chord, okay? Before I explain what one of those is, just have a listen. Here we go. Hear what was different there? An A chord. And I changed the bass line a little bit as well. So the bass line went there, and I played the E with a G sharp in the bass. And then down there for the passing chord to take us back to the start. Now, in the key of B major, the chord of A does not appear naturally. It's what we call a chromatic mediant. The reason we call it a chromatic mediant, for those of you who are interested in this kind of thing, is that the G sharp minor 7 chord that is diatonic to the key of B major, that is naturally occurring, is what we call the submediant, okay? And if we change one of the mediant chords, the other mediant chord is the one built on the third, if we change one of the mediant chords, either the mediant itself or the submediant, we call that a chromatic mediant chord, okay? People think these things are rocket science, and really they aren't. And usually the way you change them is by either making them major or minor, and or moving them up a semitone or down a semitone, a half step. And so all I've done is taken that submediant chord and moved it up, made it major, moved up a half step, okay? And it sounds kind of cool. Again, it's a really common technique. Play around with it, have fun, okay? So take that away, practice it, let me know how you get on down in the comments. I'm always fascinated to know how people do this stuff. The thing I absolutely like best is when people post their own recordings. So play a recording, post it on YouTube, post it on Instagram, whatever. All the links to my social media are down below. And let me hear you playing around with this stuff. Or let me know if you have any questions. Okay, hope you enjoyed it. Do remember to check out my product, especially How to Be a Better Musician. And I'll see you next time.